Welcome to our Let's Talk. Our session today, More Than a Score, piloting and implementing a new CQI coaching framework with the environment rating scales. I'm Debbie Mathias from the BUILD Initiative and the director of the QRIS National Learning Network. Before we begin our session, I'd like to thank the Alliance for Early Success and other generous funders for making this learning community possible. We began this series for state quality administrators and leaders to support your essential work within states around early learning systems building. Today we have colleagues registered from over 35 states and territories. We intentionally keep the sessions small to invite conversation and sharing. We hope these calls help us illuminate challenges, innovation, and promising practices. Now on to our topic for the day. States have used observational assessments to understand, with a reliable measure, the quality level of early learning programs within their states or territories or cities. Some states use the environment rating scale tools as part of the R in quality rating improvement part of the work. They might use it along with other tools in the CQI or continuous quality improvement part of the work to support the I of the quality improvement strategy. As we're all working to move beyond participation as a goal and to supporting program improvement while thinking about how accountability fits in as well, the use of observational assessment data as a source of evidence for programs to use in their improvement work has become a more imperative goal. We're seeing states deepen strategies around data-informed improvement and support of the coaches and technical assistance providers working with programs. By the way, the updated quality compendium is now available to show the observational assessments and more about technical assistance and coaching supports states are employing. For this session, participants were asked to tell us about their interest in the topic. We really do read what you put into that sign-up survey. We'll come back to some of these questions during the question and answer near the end of the session, but a few of the thoughtful ideas you expressed included that you wanted to understand what states are finding and refocusing from rating to improvement, and how to reignite energy in the system around continuous improvement. You were wondering how to better use the ERS tools in coaching and supporting program improvement. Some of you were thinking about how to support coaches and technical assistance personnel to deepen their understanding of the tools and the use of the tools and data to help programs improve their services. And to do this well, what do the technical assistants and coaches need to know and be able to do? How can states support this level of the system? You were looking for information about how these strategies can be effectively implemented with consideration to scaling and whatever the state model of support is, whether you're working through hubs, focus networks, CCR&Rs. How do states support the intermediaries working with programs? Some of you brought up implications of this model with different provider types. How does it work for home-based or center-based programs? Or thinking also about different sectors, for example, in Head Start, childcare, or school-based programs. Someone brought up also, how do these tools work with different geographies, whether rural or urban. So now it's time to get to discussion about some of these questions. And to start that off, I'm going to give us a preview of the agenda for the session today. First, we'll start with introductions. We'll get a vision of what the work is about from the creator, exactly what is learners. Then we'll hear from 4 panelists from Pennsylvania, North Dakota, North Chicago, and DC. And then we'll have time for some questions, and we'll explore your ideas, things you've put into the chat box, and we'll be able to engage. We'll also have a slight break after exactly what is learners, so that you can ask technical questions to understand better the layout of what's being proposed. I'd like to now introduce our session contributors, who I'm just thrilled to have with us here today. Starting with, and I'll talk about people in the order that they're going to present, and I'm just looking forward to their sessions and hearing from them. But Ann Henschel is the Quality Research and Program Development Manager at the Branna Group. Her passion is developing innovative ways to support teachers and program leaders in providing high-quality early care and learning for our youngest children. She's also the co-author of 2 books, A Great Place to Work and Inspiring Peak Performance. Cody Carlton is the Director of E-Learning Initiatives at Branna Group. In this role, he serves as the lead instructional designer for learners, as well as an introductory online courses for the ERS scales. Cody has over 25 years of experience in training, both designing and delivering content in educational and corporate settings. Now on to our panelists. Megan Showalter, who I had the pleasure of working with for many years in Pennsylvania, is the Program Quality Assessment Manager at the PA Key. She provides leadership for the Program Quality Assessment Team in collaboration with 4 regional supervisors. She oversees the day-to-day operations and supporting innovation of assessment services to benefit early childhood programs and classroom teachers participating in Keystone Stores, Pennsylvania's QRIS. Jennifer Prince is the CQI Improvement Coordinator at Child Care Aware of North Dakota. Along with her work in consultation, coaching, and adult education, she's also worked on program and administrative levels. Jennifer Sanders is an instructional specialist at Green Bay Early Childhood Center in North Chicago, Illinois. She coaches and supports teachers to provide environments and opportunities that promote children's growth in the domains of social emotional wellness, physical development, cognitive development, language and literacy, math and science, and the arts. Ariella Gavins is the educational consultant at REALA Early Child Care and Education, LLC. She supports early learning providers in Washington, D.C. with a wide range of consultative services on coaching competencies, leadership, workforce development, early learning system support, and organizational culture change. She also provides technical assistance that focuses on the vital behaviors of highly effective educators who defy the odds and innovation strategies to achieve, sustain, and continually increase the developmental growth and academic achievement of children. I am just so happy to welcome all 6 of you to our discussion today and the sparks that you're going to provide. I'd like to remind everyone to put your questions, ideas, thoughts, something you're doing that works into the chat box. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ann Henschel, who get us started. Thanks, Ann.
Thanks, Debbie, and good afternoon, everyone. We're so excited to spend this bit of time with fellow advocates and fans of CQI. I thought we could begin by sharing a bit of the backstory and vision planning for this CQI Coaching Framework. Interestingly, it all started with this message from a 2015 Build report. Next slide, please, Jonathan. And the next slide, please. So in it, they recommended the need to empower providers by making continuous quality improvement a core component of QIS, shifting the culture to one in which providers own the change. Several of us from Brana Group had been working in state systems prior to joining the company. We saw firsthand how programs were getting swept up into quality for a day when the assessors were in the building. The focus was all about using the environment rating scales to get a high score. We all understood this idea of getting those working directly with children to be the ones owning the change process was critical to any type of meaningful, sustainable quality improvements. So, next slide, please. Our wish was to use the wisdom of the environment rating scales and identifying the global aspects of quality learning environments and shift them into becoming part of a continuous quality improvement experience. Now, just one footnote I'm going to add here. Learners is built around items in the ERS 3, ITERS 3, FICRS 3. That being said, we don't use item or indicator numbers in this framework. We instead do a deep dive into best practices that will support improvements whether programs use the 3s or the R version of the environment rating scales. So to help us get started, next slide, please. We began with some overarching principles to build our vision, and those included rather than simply telling programs they need to engage in CQI and fill out a plan, we wanted to provide them with a step-by-step process that was easy to use and interactive. We were committed that this would not simply be just one more new requirement that teachers and providers were expected to do on their own. We believe that most people that work with young children want to provide quality, but don't necessarily know what that looks like in practice. And we wanted this new innovation to be embedded in state systems and technical assistance agencies. So we got to work almost 3 years ago and began to develop, build, and pilot what has become this CQI Coaching Framework. The result being, next slide please, something that builds on strengths rather than deficits, shifts the role of coach out of the business of being the outside expert that comes in to fix classrooms, but instead guides, collaborates, and facilitates growth. With a strong emphasis on helping all users, so users meaning coaches, directors, teachers, providers, helping all of them to understand the why for each quality practice. And perhaps most importantly, offer an easy-to-use platform for meaningful CQI collaboration of coaches, directors, teachers, and providers. In a bit, you're going to be hearing from professionals out in the field that are implementing the use of learners. So I'm just going to share, next slide please, some of the common messages that we're hearing out in the field. Those include that they appreciate that this framework uses measurable CQI data reports, that it's flexible enough to be used across various sectors, including child care programs, Head Start programs, and preschool for all programs. That it's absolutely, this is super exciting, but it really is making that shift into empowering and allowing those providers to lead the change effort. And that coaches are able to reach more programs virtually to provide more sort of in-depth, meaningful supports and resources through the learners portal within this framework. As one coach in Georgia recently shared, she said, it's not just the ability to check in with programs virtually, but that I no longer need to invest so much of my time providing professional development. Learners does that for me, and I get to do what I love, which is scaffold that learning into meaningful change. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Cody Carlton, who will briefly describe a bit about what the framework includes. Cody?
Thanks, Sam. And I just want to echo and sentiments, just how excited we are about this opportunity. And I'm going to date myself here just for a moment. I'm a child of the 80s, and one of the great commercials series from the 80s was the Fast Talker for the Micro Machines toys. Because there's a lot that I want to say about learners, but I also want to make sure you have time to actually hear from the folks in the field, which is really what you're here for. So if I get into that Micro Machine speed talker mode, I apologize up front. But before we get into the mechanics of learners, I want to spend just a minute talking about what we see as the three primary roles as we begin to develop learners, and that's the coach, the program director, and then classroom staff. And each of these roles has its own portal to access learners. For example, with the coaches portal allows a coach or a technical assistant specialist to enroll new programs, to monitor a program's progress, as well as to take the learning modules themselves. The director's portal allows program administrators to enroll new staff, monitor staff's progress, access peer learning team session materials, generate aggregate reports, share resources among staff, and as with the coaches portal, access the learning modules themselves. And then finally, the teacher's portal. The teacher's portal allows classroom staff to access the learning modules, view and print their CQI journals, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and update their progress towards their goals. And Jonathan, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So as we're advancing to the next slide, there are three components of learners. The first are the online learning modules. And I want to say before we go any further that learners is much more than just another series of online professional development. I mean, certainly the modules are one of the components, but it's not the only component. Each item in the scales is addressed in its own module. And one of our goals with learners is to help classroom staff see and understand the whys behind the practice. Anne mentioned that when she was talking about our vision for learners. And this means that they don't simply implement a change to get credit for indicator 5.1, but rather they do it because they understand the connection between what they do and child outcomes. The modules are not an indicator by indicator look at each of the items. And that's really important to note. Rather, we looked at literally thousands of assessments from across the country and identified the indicators for each item where at least 40% of classrooms struggled. And these indicators are represented as the key points within each module. So, it's important that as we talk about these modules, that the content is data-driven and it's tied to actual classroom assessment. And within each module, understanding the whys behind the practice really is foundational. So at the beginning of each module, we talk about the concepts and its importance to child development. And then for each key point, we support each key point with a why statement so that, again, classroom staff get that message reinforced, that they begin to understand the why behind the practice. For each module, participants create an individualized CQI journal. And this journal tells the story of their journey to improved quality. It's not something that's meant to be printed out, filed away, put into a notebook, but it's a living, breathing document. It contains their notes, their reflections, and goals they set for themselves as it relates to the specific module. Within each module, staff go through, they identify which key points are important to them, which ones they want to target for their quality improvement, and then we walk them through the process of creating a SMART goal related to that key point. as Ann mentioned earlier, one of our early visions was that learners was not going to be another thing that classroom staff was going to be asked to do in isolation. Program directors and coaches have access to peer learning materials for each module. We develop materials for 2 sessions for each of the modules, and these sessions provide an opportunity for staff to share with and learn from one another. The sessions allow the staff and directors to no longer just be participants in the learning, but to be co-presenters, co-facilitators, co-teachers, as each one walks along their individual journey towards quality as it relates to a concept or a module. In a nutshell, that really is learners. And I'd like to devote most of our time is hearing for how the folks in the field are actually using it. I think we're actually going to stop now, and we'll turn it back over to Deb.
Yes. Hi. Sorry about that slight glitch, but I did want to ask you, so could you go back one slide, Jonathan? The program, or what you're talking about here, is embedded in these 3 areas. There's the online learning modules about a variety of topics. There's the teacher's individualized CQI journal. And then there are peer learning team sessions. And are those typically like between teachers in different rooms, or the teaching team in a classroom? And then I have a question for you about peer learning team sessions in a family home setting, and how you've seen that orchestrated.
Okay. So the peer learning team sessions, as we began developing these materials, and Ann, feel free to jump in as well, but we really saw this as an opportunity for staff within a program to come together. They're all focused on one concept or one module, like math materials and activities, for example. So they're all sharing their learning from that, and then what each of them are targeting for their improvement efforts. And you'll hear, I mean, we actually, from some of our field studies, field tests, some programs actually go beyond the walls of a program and go cross-program with their peer learning team sessions. But again, they're all focused on one module. And then your question about...
you might, yeah, go ahead about family. That we did have that question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the question about family providers. So I have to be the bearer of a little bit of bad news first, and that is that the FICRs, learners for FICRs, probably is another 10 to 12 months away from being released fully.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean we haven't already spent quite a bit of time thinking about that. And just on a personal note, my doctoral research emphasis is on the use of virtual communities of practice and their impact on efficacy in family child care providers. So I think technology will allow some interesting platforms for family providers to get that peer learning team experience.
You know, and it's easy to think about or see, like if family providers were in a network or associated with a hub or had a natural convening, but I really like what you're saying about the notion of, you know, online or a different way of knitting those folks together, so that the time isn't spent driving in the car. It's spent, you know, on a Zoom meeting or something like that with, you know, 4 or 5 of you discussing the content and really being able to dig in. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next in that arena. I don't see any other questions in the chat box right at this moment. And I think that the examples from our panelists will begin to really illuminate and bring to light some of what you've been talking about, Cody. So again, to our audience, if you have questions or want us to hone in on something more specific, please place it in the chat box. And otherwise, I'll turn us on to Megan. All yours.
Thanks, Deb. So first, I want to thank you all for including Pennsylvania in this webinar. We are very new to implementing learners in our QRIS. In fact, our rollout plans are not even finalized yet. So I know that as we continue through our panelists today, that I'm going to be taking notes furiously, because I'm sure there are some things that they can teach us that we can use in our rollout plan. So our goal is to begin implementation this spring with orientation for our regional coaching partners. And although Pennsylvania assessment has always been a support to programs' CQI efforts, we've grown over 18 years of implementation to realize that it's not always viewed that way. And because of that, we've really begun to talk about assessment from a CQI first approach. And we really believe that bringing learners to Pennsylvania is going to help us with that. Next slide, please. So our decision-making process with bringing this platform to Pennsylvania really began with our system's Keystone Stores revised framework, which rolled out in 2017. This new framework really refocused our system to emphasize the difference between foundational quality improvement work at lower star levels and then embedding CQI into programs' ongoing practices at the higher levels of the system. It also shifted our approach from supporting programs in navigating the system and achieving individual standards to really empowering them to chart their own path to improvement through coaching. And because the revision system involved complex restructuring and some larger changes that went beyond the QRIS itself, some elements of the QRIS, including program quality assessment, remained fairly static in approach when we rolled out the new framework in 2017. Over the past couple of years, as we've shifted to a coaching mindset throughout our system, we began to look differently at how each part of our system interacts with programs. And for assessment, that meant acknowledging that programs really operate in such a complex world that involves ongoing change and uncertainty. And that can lead to certain activities such as having ERS assessments that include facility and classroom threshold scores that must be met and maintained can be perceived as somewhat of a threat to status, star level, and ultimately funding through tiered reimbursement rates. And that can have a big impact on programs. And as a result, assessment can be viewed as a high stakes barrier for programs in achieving their goals. This impacts the work that my team and I do to help programs and teachers view our ERS feedback as information that informs their continuous quality improvement and helping them embrace activities that support their ongoing improvement to classroom practices. So what we really realized is we need to start with helping everyone with shifting of perspectives. We need to help programs and teachers embrace ongoing review of practices so they begin to see when quality experiences for the children in their groups are ebbing and flowing differently than they really should. Helping them figure out how to investigate the why behind what is happening and readjusting those practices to realign it to what we know quality should be. We need to help them move away from classroom assessment being viewed as a test to the mindset of it being a resource for understanding the big picture, that it's about the children's experience, and helping them refocus their approach to get all of our approaches to giving and receiving assessment feedback from what is missing to where are the strengths and how are those strengths being used as a springboard for growing more practices that improve children's experiences. Next slide, please. So for us, bringing learners to Pennsylvania is really seen as a natural step in supporting this shifting of mindsets and embracing the CQI processes in the classroom. We want to be able to provide additional opportunities for teachers in our state to investigate why the practices the ERS lenses observes for are important for children. The platform framework includes elements that we want our programs to have, such as unique paths for growth for each teacher and program. If we allow every teacher to use their ERS feedback to decide which items they can begin learning about first, that choosing of their own personal area that interests them will make their experience personal and very motivating. We believe that the peer learning team activities feature is going to help program leaders forge deeper bonds among their staffing teams and build a team approach to continuous quality improvement. And then, of course, the ability for our state system staff to be included in the platform for both our own learning and to monitor programs engagement is really a key feature that's going to support our implementation. Next slide, please. So as I said, we're very new to incorporating this resource in our QRIS. And at this point, we are bringing it in as a resource for our coaching partners and program staff without weaving it into our STAR standards indicators at this time. But we really believe that it will be a positive impact on both programs and teachers, as well as system staff, by using this platform. For our coaching partners, we really believe it will provide a supportive path for coaching activities associated with classroom practice. We believe it'll also be a great resource for our coaches' own professional knowledge growth, as we have many new system partners and coaches with a wide range of knowledge about the environment rating scales. And we can envision a time when it is part of onboarding new staff, both coaches and potentially assessors. And for my current assessment team, it will be an additional pathway for them to use in connecting and collaborating with our partners across the state to help programs succeed. For programs and teachers, we really feel it's simply just going to be empowering. It really will help us in supporting their efforts to work to the next level of CQI, which is really about a professional lifestyle that values ongoing learning and growth. And there are two main considerations that we have for our implementation at this time. The first is that system staff will definitely have a learning curve to get comfortable with it and preparing to use it to support programs, and that involves time, which is always in short supply. To help with that, we're considering really taking advantage of our partnerships with our 19 early learning resource centers, and we'll plan how our enrollment of programs, directors and teachers will flow in each region with the ability to flex the design in ways that address each region's unique needs and concerns, but is also going to ensure equity of access and supports to all. So for now, that's what Pennsylvania can share. And I'm looking forward to sharing in the future what we learn and the impact this resource has for our programs as we go forward. And now I'll turn it over to Jennifer Prince.
Thank you. If you want to go ahead and advance to the next slide, let me tell you a little bit about North Dakota's QRIS system. Bright and early North Dakota transitioned to using I3 and E3 shortly after the revised tools came out. And learners really just started as a conversation, as an approach to train coaches to help them better understand the new tools, since reliability training was not really what they needed to successfully and effectively do their jobs. Quickly, though, we learned the utility that learners has not only for coaches, but also saw how it could be beneficial to be weaved into our QRIS system. Like most QRIS systems, our state system has embedded professional development. And being a very rural state, we learned many years ago that we need to be creative in the ways that programs and professionals obtain training and professional development in our state. A very commonly used delivery method actually in North Dakota has been online learning. The online piece of Learners, the Learners platform, supports the delivery method that is familiar to most programs in North Dakota. So technology was not a complete challenge for us, and it wasn't really a reason for us to shy away from Learners as an option. But what really sold us on trying learners in our state was the entire model that Learners provides. The online modules that support the why behind the rating scales. For years, we've been trying to help programs understand the tool is much more than just a checklist, and the scores that they receive should not be what drives them to make change. The CQI journals provides opportunities for early childhood educators to journal their findings and thoughts from the module, and the peer learning team sessions, which utilizes Plan, Do, Study, Act, provides the framework for how we have wanted to implement peer-to-peer engagement or communities of practice. Add in the fact that a coach can see what's happening in real time through the coaching portal, where coaches know what teachers and directors are accomplishing, and they can have purposeful coaching conversations individually with those directors and teachers that they're supporting. Really closely relates to the strength-based coaching model used by our CQI coaches. Learners has all the components that we're trying to make happen on our own in our state, so it felt like it was the right fit and it was the right time. As we advance to the next slide, let me tell you just a little bit about North Dakota's QRIS system, Bright and Early North Dakota. So Bright and Early uses a block system approach, and it's comprised of 4 levels or steps to quality, and each step has a unique focus that builds off of the previous step. So step 1 has a health and safety focus, and then step 2 has a concentration on space and materials. And this is where the environment rating scales and learners has been embedded. Step 3 then focuses on activities and experiences, and then we finish up with the final step in step 4, and that's where relationships and interactions are focused on. So we are a cohort-based state, which means programs can enroll to participate in the QRIS system 4 times a year. When they're selected for participation, they're assigned a child care aware coach while they work towards that next step of quality over a period of 9 months. With learners being in a pilot phase in our state, it's offered to all programs, but at this time it's not required. And at orientation, coaches explain all the benefits for participation, which includes the perk that they can receive a 1-year subscription to Learners for all their lead staff and the director at absolutely no cost to that program. It helps them meet the professional development requirements with no financial burden to programs. Let me talk for a minute on the next slide about how we linked to professional development within our states and linked to those requirements. So the first step programs start with in Learners is to create a professional development action plan, which really is that tool for the coach in the program to talk through how and what order they're going to complete the modules, and to identify peer learning team facilitators. We start with the coach facilitating peer learning teams, and then we transition that to a program leader. So we use the I do, we do, you do approach. So first a coach will do a session, and then a coach and leader or director facilitates the next session, and then eventually we allow that program to take over those peer learning team meetings. We did make one decision though about module completion in North Dakota. We decided that the first module all programs will complete is a math module. We looked at 2 years of completed environment rating scales observations, and the data really told us that in our state, almost all programs struggled with implementation of materials and math concepts. So the other thing that we did at that time is we decided that we were going to support programs by purchasing some math materials. And at the beginning of their learner's journey, we provide 1 new material for their classroom during that first peer learning team session. And these materials are based on what they've identified in their continuous quality improvement journals. And we use those materials to help them obtain one of those very first goals and implement those goals that they have set from the module. And it's really been a great and effective way for us to build relationships with those teachers and help them show success right from the beginning of that process. So Brighton Early went through the process of having every one of the learners' modules approved through North Dakota Growing Futures, and that's our state's early childhood workforce registry. This means that each module that is successfully completed, meeting all of the set requirements, will satisfy licensing training requirements, and it helps providers move through the career pathways and advance through them. Once a program has completed all the necessary components of learners, they send a verification form to Brighton Early to be awarded training credit. Brighton Early is acting as the training sponsor for these events and trainings and has a dedicated staff person that verifies, reviews, and awards credits to individuals. When the verification form is sent to Brighton Early, it triggers that staff to go into the learners portal and use the rubric to review the modules. The rubric is based on 8 criterion for each model, which includes the reflection that's done, action steps that are completed, as well as SMART goals that are thorough and complete. Along with the completion of the module and a thoughtful CQI journal, it is required that individuals participate in at least one of the peer learning team sessions before they can be awarded credit. So what does that mean for us in North Dakota? Let me show you a little bit about what's being said by our coaches. On the next slide, please. So you can see many different quotes here from coaches that are coaching programs through continuous quality improvement. One of the things I think it's important for you to know is that North Dakota has been using environment rating scales in many initiatives throughout the years, even prior to the implementation of our QRIS system. And coaches have for the first time said that learners has really made it feel like implementation of the environment rating scales is more obtainable for programs. They've seen programs and specifically classroom lead teachers take ownership of implementation and change. The coach and director are able to act more as that facilitator of change now and less like the agent of change. It gives the knowledge and the driving power to the teachers in the program. They have seen a sense of empowerment and pride in the work that teachers are doing. They understand their classrooms better, the materials in their classroom, and then how to use those materials with children. And they're very proud of the classrooms and the work that they're doing. The peer learning team session is allowing for planned time for staff to network with peers and give them time to formulate plans and also to experiment with the knowledge they get in those modules. They're not only being supported by their coach now, they're also getting support from their colleagues. In North Dakota, we also offer small grants for Step 2 programs to purchase materials and equipment. And we've already seen that programs are more intentional about the items that they're requesting on those grants because they're doing a better job of evaluating the materials they do and don't have, and they're logging them within the CQI journals. I'm currently now pondering ways that we can directly tie those grants with the learners and how we will move forward with that in the future. On the next slide, we'll look a little bit about the program's perspective. I will say that the biggest challenge programs face is etching out time in their already busy schedules to complete both the online portions of learners and then the peer learning team sessions as well. And the other challenge is how to complete peer learning team sessions in very small programs with only 1 or 2 staff. We've really started to think about these creatively, and we're working with the programs to help solve those problems or dilemmas, because we've seen the value outweigh the challenges. And having a cohort type of a system, programs enter 4 times a year, so we can do some things like matching them up with other programs. Program directors have said that they're surprised at how much teachers have to say. And all the lead teachers are contributing to that change process. One director was also able to see how different each of her teachers function in her program, and she was able to point out how they get to the same goal, they just do it in different ways. I'm excited to hear how she uses this to support her staff in their continuous quality improvement journey as they move forward. The peer learning team sessions are creating a team dynamic within programs. Staff are enjoying time together to process, to create goals, and then think about how those goals fit into the centers that they work in, not just within the classroom. They're challenging and they're inspiring each other. And with inspiration comes success. Let me turn it over to Jennifer Sanders now, who's going to talk more about the implementation of learners from a program perspective.
Thanks, Jennifer, and hello, everyone. I am speaking at the program level. Green Bay Early Childhood Center, located in North Chicago, Illinois, is a full-day preschool program funded by Preschool for All Preschool Expansion Grant. Next slide, please. Currently, we serve 272 children across 16 classrooms, 4 of which are bilingual education, 2 self-contained special education, and the remaining classes are general education. 31 children receive special education services, including both push-in resources and self-contained, and 71 children are in the bilingual education classrooms. 77 children are at 50% federal poverty level. 152 children are at 100% federal poverty level, and 43 children are at 200%. Next slide, please. So now that you know a little bit about the makeup of the population served, I will move into Green Bay's experience with learners. Green Bay has been using learners modules for approximately 2 years now. We started off with a cohort of 10 people, including both lead teachers and paraeducators, piloting a module. And after receiving such positive feedback from this cohort regarding the module's content, we decided to make the next module available to the entire staff. After completing just 2 modules, teachers and paraeducators began to voice how learners help them to better understand the indicators in ERS 3. And I saw visible changes and refinement in how teachers facilitated play and learning. So we just took off from there and included learners in our continuous quality improvement plan for school year 2018-2019, and then again for this school year, 2019-2020. Next slide, please. Partnered with learners modules is the powerful professional learning team sessions. We follow a 6-week cycle that includes completion of the module, professional learning team session 1, focusing on the key ideas from the module, and talking through individual goals set in the module. Spending about 3 to 4 weeks implementing action steps toward the goals set in the module. I, as the instructional specialist, conduct walkthroughs to observe evidence of the module item exhibited in the classrooms. And I provide strength-based feedback. Also included in the cycle is professional learning team session 2. This is where teachers and paras share out their experiences from the implementation of strategies and action steps that they're trying out in their classrooms. Each teacher and para brings an artifact from his or her experience to show to colleagues, and then talk through how their experience went for them and for the children. Next slide, please. As an administrator, I like the program administrators portal because I can monitor teachers' goals, see the updates they are making to their goals, and then I can offer support accordingly. I also like conducting walkthroughs because it gives me the opportunity to see evidence of an item against the ERS indicators. And this helps me to gain an even deeper understanding of the ERS scale, and also helps me to see trends across the school against the ERS scale, which helps me to determine what PD should look like school-wide, as well as individual teacher coaching support that's needed. The benefits I have seen within our program from full engagement with learners is the opportunities for open conversations about content and then practice within the context of classrooms. I am seeing that engaging in this cycle of learning, utilizing learners, is helping to make early learning best practices stick and stay. Next slide, please. So recently I sent a survey out to teachers and paras to get a sense of how they are experiencing the learner's cycle of continuous improvement. And as I close my segment of this presentation, take a quick read of just a few of the many positive comments made by teachers and paraeducators regarding learners. I will read two among many favorites from the list. Very reflective. I appreciate the time I have to complete, develop a goal, implement, reflect, and change. And then the last one I will read. I think the learners modules takes best practice ideas and makes them practical for all staff to use and understand. We should have had these years ago. And now I will turn it over to Miss Aurelia Gavins.
Hi, Aurelia. If you're speaking, you're muted. Aurelia, hello? Well, while we wait for Aurelia to join us, I'm sure she's there and probably scrambling to get the phone off mute or something. Let me go to a couple of the questions and ask our three panelists that have come so far to address this time issue in terms of making time within the busy routines of the day. And I know North Dakota mentioned this a little bit in terms of with busy schedules, how to set aside time for teachers to reflect and work on what they're learning. Is there anything more that you'd like to say? And I really liked what you were saying about giving programs and time to think about that together in terms of problem solving. Is there anything more you can add about that, or Jennifer, in your thinking or how you've observed that to play out?
Yeah, it's been actually really exciting to see programs problem solve, how they can do that more efficiently or effectively, or how they can even carve some time into that. So we've had some programs that will do like their peer learning team sessions during staff meetings and divide their staff up into different groups, which they were regularly scheduled meetings that they were already having, and doing them more intentionally within those staff meetings and making time to do it that way. We've also had some programs that are doing it at the very end of their day and bringing staff in just a little bit earlier. Maybe their part-time staff that would normally come in at 4 o'clock might be coming in at 3 o'clock instead. And then those lead teachers are stepping away from the classroom a little bit earlier. So every program has found a different creative way to address that. Sometimes they know when they are going to have lower count days because of holidays or other scenarios like that. So they'll pull their staff aside on those days. So it's really been about being adaptable and thinking outside of the box in order for that to happen. And they have been very excited and happy that they've taken the time to do that, because they're the ones, those are the programs that have said, I didn't realize my staff had so much to say.
That's so great. And I really like your point about a lot of teams and do have staff meetings, but this gives a focus to the staff convening and what are we talking and thinking about and looking at. And I think that's just a great point. Sometimes some of that time is burned away aside from the focus on the program and what you're trying to accomplish with the children. So I think that's neat. We do have a question, and then we're going to go back to Aurelia. Are teachers, are they thinking they need to meet weekly or monthly, or what kind of a schedule are you seeing teams develop for themselves to discuss this?
Cody, you can jump in on this one too if you'd like. We kind of set up that plan with a program to make it work for that program in North Dakota. So we vary it based on how much time can they allow in that. So we usually ask them to complete a module within a month time frame. So it's not that they need time weekly, but more like on that monthly basis. But we're flexible with that too. We want them to be intentional when they are going through the learners modules.
Okay. All right, great. Aurelia, do I understand that you're back with us?
Yes, thank you for allowing me time to reconnect. So today I'd like to discuss the conceptual model for the District of Columbia's Learn ERS pilot. Next slide, please. The first pilot for the District of Columbia was really about creating sustainable pathways that move early learning programs from just quality for assessment day to quality every day for children, families, and communities. The pilot model for DC consists of 20 early learning programs currently participating in Capital Quality, the district's QRIS. Each program participating in Capital Quality is assigned a quality facilitator who provides the center director with technical assistance support on the program's CQI plan. We have about 15 programs who have a center director, and those programs will appoint an infant toddler teacher mentor, and 5 additional programs participating in the pilot that have a program director as well as an internal instructional coach who will be working collectively to implement the learners. One thing we wanted to make sure is that since Learners was such a great platform for peer learning, we wanted to make sure that we had a mixed designation peer learning opportunities so that programs could really learn from their peers. They can learn about each other's strengths, about each other's challenges. So 85% of the programs participating in the pilot have not reached the high quality GIS designation. However, 15% of the participants in the pilot have reached high quality designation. Next slide, please. So our goal with Learners was really to strengthen the CQI process and to change the way that providers and our system perceive and utilize data. Through the Learners platform, we had the opportunity to think more thoughtfully about the CQI plan process and to use data more authentically to support program strengths. In our current QRIS system in the District of Columbia, our CQI plan is not weighted, and that's a great thing that's used in an authentic process. However, it leaves that ERS assessments or other assessment tools as the only measure to determine someone's designation. This use of data has really had an impact on the provider population, and they're starting to perceive data being used more as a compliance hammer versus a way for them to work through continuous quality improvement. So what Learners has done for us in our pilot is has given us the opportunity to move from compliance and help providers perceive data not just as a means of a result or an outcome, but help them to use data to really think about their strengths, to shine the light on things that are going well in their CQI plan, and to help them to illuminate the path to greater and ongoing success. I think this gave us an opportunity for state leaders to make a conscious and deliberate effort to communicate that we believe that data should not be used simply for compliance, but it can also be used to grow our programs, to acknowledge our strengths, and to help us develop over time. Next slide, please. So as we develop the Learners pilot for the District of Columbia, Learners platform and the work with the Brain Off team has really helped us to rethink the way we utilize data. And we were able to design a very individualized pilot for the District of Columbia that really focused on closing the content gap. We noticed throughout our system that various TA providers, directors, and educators had different levels of knowledge for infant and toddler development. And so we wanted to use Learners as an opportunity for our system as a whole to learn and grow together. So closing the content gap around the ERS tools was crucial for our design. Another important factor of the District of Columbia's design was to use a strength-based approach that really pushed and acknowledged the culture of appreciation. And how we decided to do that was to really look at data differently by trying to find and track positive deviance. We wanted to know who was doing things great, who's doing things well, and how. And then to elevate those processes and elevate those things that programs and teachers and educators are doing really well and share those strengths with others. So really changing the way that we perceive data to identify and use it as a culture of appreciation. Peer learning, as I previously stated, and several of our other presenters, is a huge and important process for the learners platform. And it gave us an opportunity to not only provide opportunities for our system to learn together as a whole, but really to empower educators as the experts, to allow teachers to become mentors and to share what they're doing with other teachers. So it was a very intentional process to use with your learning system. Additionally, we wanted to create a system for deliberate practice that would strengthen educator self-efficacy. So often throughout this process, teachers don't really have an opportunity to really practice their skills that they're working on. We didn't want them to just practice them while the coach was there. We really wanted to create a system of deliberate practice that helped educators to understand that, yes, I can do this, and yes, I can be successful. And so utilizing the journal reflections was a great way to do that, as well as in creating embedded professional development opportunities for an educator as a self-coach. And what we mean by that is that we create a system for them to practice the skill and coach themselves. So if a provider or educator wanted to increase her skills around praising children, a way to self-coach might be to put 10 items in your pocket and move one over each time you give a child authentic praise. And then to calculate that data at the end of each day and share that back with your team and your coach. So giving them the opportunities to build their own strength through self-coaching. And finally, one thing particularly unique to the DC model is learners gave us the opportunity to customize our goals. So we wanted to rethink the SMART goals, because one of the things that was important to both our providers and our TA system was that our goals really promote inclusion and equity. So we wanted to make sure that we tried to transform our process from just identifying SMART goals to making goals more inclusive and equitable for all children. And we do that by, as we develop goals, we really start to think about how the theory or the practices can move beyond just moving theory to practice, but putting things into a relational or cultural context. For example, the meal and snack indicator in the ERS tools is a tool that is not just about meals and snacks. In the District of Columbia, a third of our infants and toddlers live in 2 communities, 2 wards, where there are definite food security and food access challenges. And one ward in particular has one grocery store that serves over 78,000 people. So when we wanted to think about how to develop goals, we didn't want to just develop goals that were meaningful to the tool, but we wanted to take these tools and help educators really understand, what does this look like in our particular communities? What does this look like for our families? What does this look like for children we serve here at your center? And when you're looking at an indicator like meals and snacks, if you're in a program or a community where there is food security or food access issues, things like that, changing the why, not just to fit developmentally appropriate practice, but why is this important for our community? Why is nutritional guidelines and food being served to all children? Why is meeting individual needs and schedules even more crucial for children here in our community? So we really wanted to take this opportunity to customize our goals and focus on inclusion and equity, an inclusion and equity lens through the learner system. So thank you. That's what I would like to share today, and I will turn it back over to Debbie.
Hi. Thank you so much. I like the SMARTY goals. That's very clever. So we have a question in the chat box going back to the working with family child care providers during this interim where there's not a specific tool. And it made me wonder if there was a way to combine cohorts that were working more with either infants and toddlers or preschoolers, like to think about cohorts using the other two tools and potentially using them to inform some PD. But I could see my way to like developing a similar format and beginning some work with family providers to think that through. Does anybody else have any other comment about I saw Megan put a few things into the chat box about what they're working on, and she mentioned that they're working with groups of family providers to provide ERS professional development and then have the ongoing partnering with coaches and groups of providers and cohorts for discussion then. During the meetings, they have assessors and coaches are paired and have planned activities that help those in attendance take their learning deeper so to gain a deeper understanding of, you know, what the indicators mean and really the why behind them, like Megan said at the beginning. Does anyone have any anything to add about the family child care? Ann or Cody, anything more you'd like to say about that part?
I'll share. And Jennifer Prince and I were chatting back and forth, so I don't know if she wants to jump in. But one of the things that North Dakota has been doing for a while now is with the Thickers online introductory course, we actually enabled a discussion board. So they are actually have already established these virtual communities of practice with each cohort of family providers that come into their QRIS, and they begin to have those conversations around the instrument and their practices using the introductory courses. Now, Jennifer, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about that. So the way that we've kind of structured those in our state is that there will be weekly chat times that happen through that that portal within that training. And then we have somebody that goes in and responds to the chats as they're happening, poses more questions back to them, and it kind of becomes a board where they can ask questions of others. They're required to do some chatting with other participants in there, as well as kind of that community of practice expectation. And it's worked really well in our state until Learners is launched. So it's kind of a way that we wanted to connect providers that are family childcare providers, because we know that isolation can occur within that population. So how do we bridge that gap? And we knew that they were already taking this course. So through conversations with Cody, we were able to come up with this solution, and it's worked really well so far.
And this is Ann. I'll also jump in and sort of expand the conversation that in Washington, D.C., when we provided the orientation for that group of coaches, they're really starting right now focusing on ITERs and infant toddler classrooms specifically, but they have their coaches that are family child care provider coaches there for the learners orientation, and got them sort of to kind of start thinking and planning for how they're going to launch this within the family child care community. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, you know, just in the next couple of months here, we're going to be starting to develop these FICRS modules for learners. And as those are sort of built, our clients will be able to go in and access the modules as they're ready. So for example, we didn't have every single module for ERS complete, but North Dakota started tapping into those because we had some so that they could at least get started. And given that it takes, at least a good month to have any kind of meaningful experience with a module, you don't necessarily need to wait until every single module is developed and ready. So those are a few other things to be keeping in mind as you're thinking about it.
I'd like to go back to this question about how the approach, and I think that the answer is part in that people are kind of driving their own interest in learning, but I'm really curious about, especially Aurelia, what you're finding in diverse communities, or like, is it working for all communities in DC, and what are you learning so far about that?
Well, what we're learning is that we really need to take an opportunity to move the theory and the practice of the tool beyond a practical stance and put it in a cultural context. And so as we've been able to do that, our providers have been more responsive to the tool, more open to learning about the tool, because they feel like it connects back to them. It's not just a way to rate them, it's a way to talk about and advocate for their community.
Right now, are the tools available in English only, or are we, tell us a little bit about that, Cody or Anne. Where are you in terms of development of the platform in multiple languages?
We knew this question was going to come up. The good news is that we Spanish version of the ERS modules will be out for release in the coming months, with the ERS modules slowly being released in Spanish. Beyond Spanish, we haven't really discussed what additional languages, if any, need to be supported, and how what that support would look like. We're certainly open on what that would look like, and there's some different ways that we can do it, providing some captioning and subtitles that wouldn't be the full-blown translated versions.
And this is something Aurelia is pretty passionate about, and she's sort of giving us some ideas and wanting to kind of think of how to perhaps partner in some way to support that. So we know that this is important,
I remember that when North Dakota was speaking, they were talking about approving the modules within the state so that practitioners were getting credit within the ERS or licensing system for the content. And that's, I think, for groups that are working across multiple states can be a huge challenge, finding that state-specific person who can help walk through the approval process on something like that. And is there anything else, or Cody, anything else you'd say about that in terms of, like, I know that this is a fairly new initiative and that you're working toward here. Like, how many states have approved the modules, or what are you seeing in that arena?
Do you want to go? I'll say one thing and then I'll turn it over to Cody. He's actually really good at kind of articulating how we're looking at the, it's sort of ironic because remember that the early vision of ours was that this is going to be a CQI tool, a framework. And really what we've discovered is it's also this incredibly rich, powerful professional development. In Georgia, we're working with a Head Start agency with 17 counties, and they're super clear that tying each module to their state training hours is the carrot that is really motivating and inspiring the teachers. And the leadership within that agency has made it a priority, saying this is going to be our professional development. So if you need the 10 hours or the 18 hours that you need to be a part of their QRS system, you get those hours through completing these modules and CQI journals. And so that's been one example of helping to kind of tie it with the PD so that people are kind of inspired to really engage.
Cody, anything else you'd add to that?
I mean, I'll just add that, we've got someone as part of Brandon Group that's our primary contact with folks, giving them the materials that they need to facilitate that state approval process, to make it as easy as possible. I mean, every state is different, so we don't have a uniform way of doing it, but we have what I think is the material in a universal format that can be applied across states to facilitate that approval process. But it is important, and it goes back to our vision of not wanting this to be something that's just added on to an already full plate. And
linking the data you're already getting and what the teachers are learning using the tool to supporting their thinking about it and development on it. I was just curious if you had a way that you're receiving feedback or one of the things I thought was interesting is we're talking about providers improving their practice, but we're also getting into how our TA and coaches improving their practice and data use and ability to support programs in these concepts. I loved what North Dakota said about looking at where everyone was scoring not as good on the tools from the state level and seeing that be a push point for where are we going to start in our professional development at more the macro level or even the CCR&R or regional level or hub level. So the thought then of how they're using the data at the intermediary level and at the state level to inform the professional development, I think is a very intriguing one. So when you talked about the different portals, can you break it down by regions or look at the whole state, or tell us a little bit about how the data works and management system works in terms of who can get a bird's eye view at what levels, right? We know the program can get their own data and their own view of it, right? But beyond that, talk a little bit more about that.
So one of the things that we're working on is a portal that would allow that bird's eye view, that state level view, for someone to be able to look at data across the state and dissect it by region. But also what's exciting for us is because, we're also the ERS data system, and we've got all of this assessment data, but being able for those folks who use the data system to do their assessment piece, to be able to link that data with learners is powerful. And that's what we're really excited as we get further along in the process to see develop.
It's funny, Debbie, because I thought where you were going with your question is that we're all sort of on this CQI journey. I mean, I keep saying that even just the development of this framework, we built ERS and thought it was so phenomenal, and now we have ITERs and it's even better, and we just keep sort of growing and learning. But one of the actually recent things that, because we're getting feedback back from all these smart people out there in the field, one of the things that we're working on now is the reflective questions specific for the site director. So as that site director is completing a module, she isn't having to necessarily reflect on what are the sort of things happening in a particular classroom, but what are the questions she should, as that sort of program leader, be thinking about linked to CQI related to that module, and what are the sorts of ways that she can be supporting her team. And then we're doing the same for the coaches. So the coaches also are kind of learning from these modules, but what do they need to think about in reflecting as a coach on how they sort of support the teachers in improving practice. And so it just keeps sort of building on itself, that this is sort of a tool that is supporting everybody, no matter what your role is, at sort of strengthening your understanding of best practice.
We know that because I'm reacting to a question in the chat box, we know that because this isn't a government-funded initiative or whatever, there is a cost associated with it. Who would people, and the cost might be different at a program level versus a state level. You know, there are a lot of different ways to look at the cost involved. Who would people reach out to if they have questions about the cost of getting involved in the initiative and thinking about this tool of learners? Cody, is it you?
Excellent question. I don't know, Cody, I would suggest that you go to our website, to www.branagh, BRANAGH group. And we have, right on that front page of our website, there's a section to learn more about learners. And if you click that, there's actually some great, I think Donna Wade was asking for kind of talking points or how to sort of help leadership in your state systems. We've got some great little video clips on that page to give some additional information about learners, but there's also a place where you can ask for more information to learn about the price and all that sort of thing. I will say it's an annual, yearly a subscription, and it's based on sort of the number of teachers and site directors that you would want to have participate, and we're very intentional that it's not for the mom and pop child care center. This really is for CCR&R agencies, state systems, those folks, to be able to bring to their work.
Well, we're just about ready to wrap up our discussion on this interesting, ambitious new line of thinking with the use of the ERS tools, which I'd like to go back and say, like many of the observational assessments, was originally conceived as a CQI tool. That I remember using the tool in the 80s as a program director to improve practice within the center and have a way to help teachers kind of assess where they were and think about the next steps of where they're moving. But it's interesting to see this new idea at the intermediary partner and state level about how to support this kind of work in programs with the use of the tool. Just in wrap up, I'd like to go back through and ask people to reflect on if you're wrapping up and saying one last thought to the participants in the webinar about our discussion today. And Anne, what would you start with as a wrap up?
I think right where we started at the beginning, that I think we're onto something that really genuinely empowers those working directly with children, and that's, I think, the most rewarding and exciting thing. And yes, it is a challenge for them to find time to do this work, but so far, even in some of the most rural communities where they don't even have staff meetings, once the teachers sort of open up the modules and get started. They get so engaged and invested. They're actually jumping ahead and doing more modules than what their programs are asking them to do because it so connects and meets them where they're at developmentally as a practitioner.
Cody, what are you thinking about?
For me, and what excites me most is that Learners is really built around this a strength-based model and getting away from that deficit-based model. And it creates an environment that allows teachers to reflect on practices. You know, we put in intentional pauses for reflection to get them thinking about what they're doing and to not focus on what they're not doing or what they're doing poorly, but focusing on what they are doing and what they're doing well.
Thank you, Megan. What advice would you give to states thinking about this? I loved how you presented, you know, Pennsylvania's moving in this direction, and here's what we're, you know, really intentionally trying to consider. That was very helpful. Anything you'd leave us with here?
I would leave us with, and Cody used the word reflection, and honestly, that's what I've been doing throughout the remainder of the presentation after I said my piece, because we are so early in our implementation process. I would encourage anyone who is, you know, working through the process of that shift to really being deeply engaged in CQI, to reach out to everyone who's participated here today, both on the panel as well as to others that have logged in as participants. Let's have large conversation back and forth with each other about this, because I think that's how we can really create some rich outcomes on the back end of this.
Jennifer Prince, what are you thinking?
I just have to share that I'm really happy that we took the leap of faith in trying something that was new and different, and that we're very excited to look at where that long-term effect is going to have and how learners is going to play out in the long term in North Dakota. Because we're, just like many of the others that are listening today, we're looking at creating that transformational change, and we just don't want quality for a day. We want that continuous quality of improvement. We know that children in our country deserve the best high quality care, and so we're hoping that this is one step in that direction.
Jennifer Sanders?
I would like to close out by saying Learners adds an extra strong layer to ERS, in that Learners helps educators understand why it matters, how children benefit from adults setting up the learning environment in a certain fashion, how children benefit from developmentally appropriate materials and explorations and interactions that help children develop social, emotionally, physically, cognitively, in language, literacy, math. And Learners lays out what this implementation looks like in the classroom in a very user-friendly way. And so finally, I would say teachers and paras at Green Bay are ever evolving in their craft due to our learners' cycles of professional development.
Thank you. And finally, Aurelia, if you could say the piece for the end of our time together today.
Thank you, Debbie. Learners has really given us an opportunity to move from using data as a compliance hammer to it being an opportunity to shine the light on things that are going well. And so this is what we really appreciate about the Learners platform, as well as it has given us the ability to really think through our data and the indicators to customize it to move this theory beyond practice, but into a relational and cultural context for the children and communities that we serve. So this is a very exciting opportunity.
Well, I'd just like to thank the six of you so much for sharing your journey and what you're thinking and how you're working to transform CQI rating scales and accountability into a CQI perspective. And I appreciate you all sharing your journeys with us. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.